If you've ever felt unsure about how to help your kid through a hard day, you're not alone. In this episode, we'll talk about what true mental health looks like, how to support your child without fixing everything, and why your own coping matters more than you think. We'll cover screens, sibling fights, big feelings, and when it might be time to ask for help. This isn't about perfection, it's about staying connected to your kid.
When you remove every obstacle for your kids, they lose resilience. But it doesn't mean that we can't let them learn little by little, that sometimes we need to step in to help them. They're not on their own, but we let them move away from us little by little.
One of the most prominent and worrisome myths that circulates around us right now is that mental health is about feeling good. Mental health is not and has never been about feeling good. While it's great to feel good or calm or relaxed or at ease and to have our kids feel that way, that's not what mental health is. Mental health is about two things. It's about having feelings that fit the situation and, most importantly, managing them well. So if your kid has a bad day, they're going to be upset. We love our kids. We hate to see them in pain. And when they come home after a long school day and they're upset about something, say they did poorly on a test, they will put that distress in front of us, and it will activate what I would say is like a marrow deep wish to help them feel better. The parenting instinct that we actually have to work against is our incredibly strong urge to prevent our kids from feeling any emotional pain. Life will hand our kids challenging moments. What is most critical is that our kids learn how to handle those difficult challenges effectively and ultimately on their own. One thing we need to appreciate is that the school day for our kids is very long and very hard and very tedious. They handle so many frustrations with incredible grace. And the way I think about the school day for most kids, it's like they're going through the school day picking up emotional garbage. Maybe they're in third period and the teacher introduces a group project and your kid is like, okay, just please don't put that one kid in my group. And then the teacher's like, all right, you two, you're a group. Your kid does not throw themselves on the floor. They do not have a tantrum. They say, okay, let's exchange numbers. We'll work together over the weekend. They take that piece of garbage and they jam it in their pocket. Then let's say they go to their locker and their locker is jammed and they gotta get to class and they can't get their stuff. They do not freak out. They take that piece of garbage and they jam it in their pocket. The whole day goes on like this. They hold it together gorgeously. Then we see them in the evening and we say, how was school? And out comes all of the garbage. They feel tremendous relief most of the time as they share all of the frustrations of the day. Our job is to figure out what to do with this garbage. My advice, treat it like garbage. When you say to a kid, how was your day? Envision yourself opening an emotional garbage bag and just let them toss it all in. And then tie it off, put it away. Most of the time, once they've dumped their garbage, they feel better. You should only worry if after unloading all of the frustrations of the day, your child is still suffering. That may be a time when you need to check in with the school or get some extra supports. But if most of the time your kid is great at school, and I'll tell you, it's often because they know they get to come home and complain about their frustrations, things are working just as they should. One of the hardest things in parenting is when your kid is upset and they won't tell you what's wrong. I've had this experience as a mom myself, and it's really frustrating because we get the idea that until you tell me what's wrong, I can't help you. When I've asked teenagers why they keep it to themselves, they give me lots of reasons. Sometimes they say, well, I know what they're gonna say, and I don't really wanna hear it. Or, as one teenager said to me, you know, by the time I get home, I'm like 90% of the way over it, and rehashing the whole thing for my family is not gonna help me feel better. So work with the assumption that there's a reason your kid doesn't feel they can share what's upsetting to them and that they don't need to. You can still comfort a kid without knowing what the problem is. I think one of the most generous and important things we can do as parents is to be there to offer support without requiring that our kids tell us exactly what's wrong. So the way psychologists think about coping, and especially coping with painful emotions, is that no matter what, we're gonna do it. So one of the best pieces of advice I ever got as a parent, I actually found on the inside of a Dove chocolate wrapper. It said, don't talk about it, just be about it. So when it comes to coping, we actually can help our kids in two ways. One is to support healthy coping when they're upset. Ask them, do you want to talk about what happened? Want to take the dog for a walk? The other, and perhaps the most important one, is to model healthy coping.
So when we think about the emotions we show in our everyday life, they are contagious, and stress is contagious. Children view the way we deal with the world when we're angry, when we're irritable, when we're nervous, and they absorb that, and they learn that when things happen in my life, this is how I'm supposed to react.
So when we have hard days at work, it's really important that we don't come home and take it out on everybody or say, where's the wine? I've had a terrible day. And instead, model for our kids how we want them to manage tough days. So we might say, you know what, today was terrible. I'm gonna go take a walk outside. If anybody wants to come with me, I'll take company. No matter what, I know I need to be out in nature.
One of the things we as parents place on ourselves as a burden is that we have to be in control of everything. We have to know what's going to happen, and we have to have it all in place. And that if we don't, our children are going to suffer. But we quickly learn that we can't control everything that happens around us. And it's okay to talk to our children and say, you know what? I'm going to tell you when I'm upset or nervous. And it's okay, because I'm going to work and we're going to try to make it better. And you can tell me when you're upset and when you're nervous, and we'll work together to make it better. And that's really going to help.
We are in a youth mental health crisis in the United States of America. The larger factors tend to be about access to care, access to someone when you really are needing that mental health help, access to competent care, people who are aware of the science in mental health and can bring that to bear in helping with a problem. And so the more we listen to that, and that's true of all kinds of research studies, all kinds of perspectives where we center the voice of our youth, where when we ask them, what is causing you stress? This is the youth generation speaking. I'm more educated than I ever have been about my mental health, but I can't find the help that I need. That is the crux of the crisis that we're in. If they can't find the help that they need, where do they go? The internet. Where do they go? The device that's in their hand. The point that we're missing in the debate around technology and youth mental health is that we keep talking about it like there's a magical age where kids, wake up and suddenly they're capable of managing themselves on social media, having a phone, being exposed to all kinds of content on the internet. And there's no research to support that. The reality is no one wakes up at age 16 being able to drive a car. You have to learn the competencies in being able to drive a car so that at 16, you can pass the test that allows you to then conduct a motor vehicle semi-responsibly, but still through age 25, you can't rent one because they know the risks.
There are a couple things that get rolled up together that actually don't help us parent the way we want to. One is screen time and social media. My advice is if you are ready for your kid to have a phone and it makes sense for your kid to have a phone, consider giving them a phone, even a smartphone, with no browser, no social media apps, and no capacity to add apps without your permission. Let them text, let them listen to music, let them take photos, see how they handle that. And then over time, if they're interested in social media, you will have a track record that you can look at about whether they're ready to handle it responsibly.
Technology definitely comes with risks. And so our focus should be building up the competencies for our kids to be able to be aware of those risks, to be able to navigate them well, and to be able to use technology for good.
In an ideal world, if social media is done moderately and you've been mentoring your kids so that they're not using it inappropriately, they don't have their phones at night, they don't use it during mealtime, and again, they're still getting their exercise, their schoolwork, all the things. They're interested in enjoying a robust in-person social life. I'm not worried about social media. I am worried about it if you have a kid who bends anxious or depressed, if you have a kid who's feeling isolated, if you have a kid who is using it in lieu of in-person socialization, if they're using it and they can't get away from it, and if they're using it for the wrong reasons, to get approval versus connection, to feel worse about themselves versus get inspired. So you want to be mindful.
We have this kind of thing we're wrestling with as a society in thinking that we're just going to put the genie back in the bottle and somehow, make it so technology goes away, when we need to realize technology's here, it's here to stay, there's no putting the genie back in the bottle. It comes along with real risks for mental health and at the same time, real possibilities for how it increases our social connection or how it can actually be used for good for our mental health and wellness. And the more we think of it as a kind of practical, not panic-based approach, the better.
By the time you have a teenager, they can spend a lot of their day on screens, whether it's doing their homework or looking at their phones or playing video games. So how do you approach the question of how much screen time your kid should have? Well, there's two ways to think about it. First of all, what's on the screen? They can have lots of time on screens if what they're looking at on the screen is helping them learn and grow. So it's the content on the screen that we want to think about first. And we want to be more easygoing about content that is good for kids, and we want to be very vigilant about content that is bad for them. The second thing that we want to do is make sure that time spent on screens isn't getting in the way of things that are good for overall development. Kids should not spend so much time on screens that it's interfering with their sleep, that it's interfering with them being physically active, that it's interfering with them spending time in person with people, that it's interfering with their homework, that they're toggling back and forth between their work and something entertaining on a screen. So the way to think about it is make sure their time is full of all of those things that are really important for healthy development. You can let screen time tuck in around that and make sure that what's on the screens is appropriate for kids. The topics of eating, weight, and exercise are some of the most delicate in family life, and that's especially true around teenagers, and it can also be especially true around girls. For girls, the world has a lot of opinions about how they're supposed to look, and our daughters quickly become aware of those. As a general rule, you're actually going to not want to talk about this too much. Instead, you're just going to want to model healthy habits in your home and be mindful of how you talk about your own eating, exercise, and weight.
When we talk about bodies, just as a baseline, think about our bodies in terms of what they can do versus how they look. When you are talking about yourself, you want to be a real person. You're getting to that point in life when you're tired of worrying about your arms and you make self-deprecating jokes about your arms with your friends. It's okay to be self-deprecating as long as there's a tone that is self-accepting and loving. My arms aren't that strong anymore. I'm working on my bone density. They're not gonna look like they're really strong, but I can tell that they're stronger, is a little bit more generous than I've got a hanging sack of skin on my arms. And then how we talk about other people gives a lot of clues to our kids about what we value. It's the same thing with beauty standards. You could say, oh, I'm gonna be so careful. I'm not gonna criticize my body. I'm not gonna talk about bodies as anything but instruments in this household. And then you see your friend, and every time you see your friends, you comment on how their body looks. It sends a message.
Now, there may come a time where you're worried about how your kid is eating, or you're worried about how they're exercising. Maybe they're too sedentary. So the time may come where you do feel like you need to say something. In these moments, you're going to want to frame the conversation in terms of self-care. You're going to want to talk about your kids' responsibility to take good care of their body. So you might say, listen, I'm noticing that you're actually cutting out a lot of foods. And not eating a wide range of foods means that you're not taking good care of yourself. Your body needs a lot of different kinds of foods in order to sustain itself. Or you may say, if you're not moving your body enough, you're not taking care of yourself in the way your body deserves. The point here is that you don't want to turn this into any sort of battle between you and your kid. You're going to want to frame this in terms of their responsibility to take good care of themselves.
Frequently, parents will say, what's the starting point for how I kind of decrease conflict, manage behavior with my kids? How do I start? And what's really underneath that question for a lot of parents is more about consequences. But instead of thinking of it as what's the consequence, it's about building a whole system. The first step is to understand why your child is acting a certain way, which means we need to understand how motivation works for kids. So, for example, a parent will say, look, it's constantly this like sibling conflict, and I don't know what to do about it because everything seems like it's a fight between the two of them. They might say, for example, the kids were just watching TV on the couch while I was in the other room, and they started fighting. I'll begin the work by telling parents there's only 4 motivators for all human behavior. This is true of children, teens, and adults, and they're abbreviated by the abbreviation SEAT. What SEAT stands for is sensory, escape, attention, tangible. And what that abbreviation stands for is it's this notion that everything that we do has some combination of an internal sensory experience or emotion or particular input we're getting in our 5 senses. It allows us to escape something that we might not want to do. It gets us attention from peers, from parents, from other humans, or it brings us a tangible reinforcer, a privilege, an activity we like, a particular thing that we were desiring. And behaviors aren't often motivated by just one. They're often motivated by a number of them. So let's look at a typical sibling fight on the couch. If you're a kid and you're watching a TV show with your sibling and you're getting kind of bored, there's an escape from boredom by annoying your sibling, which also gets you attention, which also gives you a feeling of power and control, and which also might get the activity change. And then you've got the quadfecta of all of SEAT that is motivating that behavior. And the parent comes in the room and thinks, why would you ever do this behavior, given that you know that I don't like it? You know I don't like you annoying your sibling. And the kid doesn't really have an answer for it. Kids don't often think in that kind of multi-step process. What we'll work with parents on is we'll say, look, you can see the motivators here. You can see the landscape. So frequently it's kind of flipping that script where we'll say to a parent, how do we make it so that we arrange the environment so that perhaps things that are related to sibling conflict are removed? We've got to do that thinking for them in setting up their environment for success. One of the ways we'll illustrate how parents can set up kids' environments for success is we'll ask them to think about their child's classroom, where there's always a lot more of environmental control than you would actually find at home. And we'll say, what do you notice about what a teacher does in setting up the classroom? And parents will say, well, I noticed that they only have access to certain materials at their desk, or they have like a visual schedule on the board that tells them what's going on. And I'll say, right, you see that inherently in the classroom, but home is a much more chaotic space. So now how can we take some of those principles and think about what that looks like at home? And then we'll think about, afternoon situations where parents say, my issue is they have got to get home. We've got to turn around and go to like some of the activities they might have after school because one kid has dance class and one kid has soccer and we want to get some food in them because they're ravenous after the school day. And a parent will say, but I don't know what to do because we're always getting these huge fights over what they're eating. How do we put out a set of snacks that the parent feels like regardless of what they choose, that is fine and we can kind of be out the door? Maybe it doesn't involve even coming into the kitchen. Maybe the snack bag is brought with us in the car and thus it is a set matrix of snacks that can be chosen and you're not even putting yourself in a situation where there would have to be a conflict and then also a need to get shoes back on and get back out the door. we could at least decrease that conflict by removing the particular source of conflict and making it so that there's a lot clearer path to that, end goal. Most parents deal with the same challenges every day. Getting kids out the door to get to school on time, finishing homework, separating from parents for school or for extracurricular activities, getting kids to eat the foods we need them to eat, and getting to sleep on time. Here's how you handle the morning rush. Write down the things that need to be done. Even for young kids, you can have like a visual schedule on the board. Then catch the kid actually doing those particular things as much as you possibly can. It might seem minute, it might seem ridiculous, but praising them for getting a leg of their pants on is better than screaming at them because their shirt isn't on. Then, beyond that, help them to get a better awareness of time. If they actually get through the morning rush in the time that you would like to see them get through, think about how to reinforce that. Maybe we do something special after school. Maybe read an extra book at bedtime. But think about how you can say, I really think you did well, and I want to reward ourselves in the future if we're able to get through this together again. First thing is tracking assignments or checking the online repository or looking at what is listed on the worksheet, just so you can agree on the task that's in front of you. Then the next thing is to think about making 2 statements every time you talk to your kid while you're trying to coach them through homework, because this is what becomes ingrained in their mind as their own self-talk. It is praise something they've already done well and prompt the next small step. Praise something they've already done well and then prompt the next small step. Even if they whine, even if they protest, you just keep talking that way. And at the end of homework, you remind them how much time it took. So often kids think that it took an hour and a half for them to finish an assignment when it took 17 minutes. It's really helpful in terms of their future coping for them to be reminded that if they just sit down and focus on that particular thing, it takes 1/5 of the time they actually think it's going to take. When your child is anxious, when you're leaving them with an adult that you feel perfectly confident in their ability to care for your child, the best thing you can do is define a ritual and then get the heck out of there. The way that we separate. For my daughter in preschool was 8 hugs. For my son, it might have been singing a particular song or doing some sort of song before we left the car, and then saying, and once we've done the ritual, I'm gonna leave you with this incredibly caring and supportive adult, and I will be walking right down the hallway, waving goodbye as I go. It is okay to see our kids in distress. It is okay to see them cry as they confront challenges. The object with separation anxiety should not be that your child is perfectly calm at separating. It should be that we tolerate the discomfort of separation for their own good. Kids' preferences change, oftentimes unpredictably, across development. And the more that we can say, I'm gonna do 2 things. I'm gonna feed my kid, which means presenting them with some of the things that they like, and I'm also gonna keep hoping for an opportunity to reinforce their bravery or novelty. And if they try anything, we say, I'm so proud of you for trying that new thing. Even though I know you're telling me that broccoli tastes absolutely horrible, but it's a process of hundreds or thousands of trials to get someone's palate really to broaden. And it isn't about talking about just the things they eat, but about how much we're proud of them for trying the new stuff. You're going to experience challenges. You're going to see challenging behaviors. Your kid is going to make you frustrated and angry, and at times they're not going to listen to you. And this is just one of the things that makes parenting both incredibly difficult and incredibly rewarding. Almost every parent can use some help. That's one key thing. And then some parents might find that the help they need is because their child might meet criteria for a particular clinical diagnosis. We want to provide them answers that help to clarify when and how they might seek help. When we get into the question of whether or not a child has clinically relevant difficulties with behavior, we tend to focus on an abbreviation called FIDI. And what this means is frequency, intensity, duration, and impairment. So if anybody goes and looks at the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders, what you'll find is that a lot of the behaviors that are common for any particular mental health diagnosis, depression, an anxiety disorder, ADHD, or behavioral disorder, are things that lots of kids demonstrate. And so parents will say, well, wait a second, if they demonstrate this, it's kind of like college students who take their first clinical psychology class and suddenly like, oh my God, I have every diagnosis. You don't. It's that those behaviors are common to all humans and they fall in a continuum. And for a lot of parents, what we'll say when we come into the office is we're assessing for a certain level of stress that those behaviors are causing that put us in that level of clinical severity. How often they're happening, that's frequency. How intense they are and kind of what distress they cause, that's the I in FIDI, or the first I should say. Then the D, which is duration, how long have they been happening? Almost every clinical diagnosis has a time constraint where we would say it has to have been happening kind of this long before we'd really say this is an area of kind of clinical focus. And then finally, it's impairment. It's how is this affecting a kid in their family situation, in their situations with their friends, at school, and how they're interacting with teachers. And we need to have all of that information before we would ever make a clinical diagnosis. Whether we make a clinical diagnosis or not is not always indicative of whether or not a family needs help. The reality is if a family is stressed, the techniques that we would teach a family whose kid has a clinical diagnosis are still the same. They work for everybody. If you have access to a mental health professional, we do not bite. Please come see us sooner rather than later. Because the fact is that what we see in the research is that parents tend to wait anywhere from 1 to 2 years from the time that they think something might be wrong to the time when they actually might speak to a teacher, a school counselor, a licensed mental health professional. And that time is time we could have been doing so many things for that kid's development to ensure that parent feels supported, that kids feel supported, and that we can actually help everybody to be feeling like they're focused on their own mental health and wellness. So we don't want that waiting period. We want to break down the stigma to say, just talk to people. Talk about the challenges you face, and hopefully we as a society can agree that we don't need to pathologize everything.
Parenting itself is a developmental process. Just as your child is growing, changing, and learning, so are you. And love and affection and kindness, that's what generates good parenting.
In the transition to parenthood, our brains have much greater capacity to change than they have since adolescence. And in that capacity to change, there's a vulnerability, but there's also great possibility. And the times that we're most vulnerable are the times in life that we also have the most opportunity to grow.
At the end of the day, we want parents to think about how much this process is changing them. And the idea is you try to think about incremental changes you can make in any given day. Just keep trying new things. And what you'll notice is as you try these new patterns, you break out of ruts, you have new strategies, you find new moments of connection with your kid, and it may not be on the level of a day or a week where you notice those changes, but 3 months, 6 months, a year out, you notice massive changes you've made.
So take good care of yourself. Be sure to make time for rest. When you rest, enjoy it all the way. In order to manage your stress, you're going to want to model exactly how it's done.
We shape our children, but our children are individuals. They have strengths and weaknesses and desires. And the joy of parenting is getting to know them and getting them to grow into those strengths. And they're getting ready to leave me and go into the world.